Hello, I would like to warmly welcome you in this session where we are going to discuss about how to re-enchant democracy, this unique system that was firstly witnessed in this land and thrives in some different parts of the world while is also crushed in some others. A very warm and wholehearted thank you to the organizers of the third Eleusis Symposium and the World Human Forum. Thank you very much. I have with me two deep thinkers, to say the least. Hélène Landemore, Professor of Political Science at Yale University. Hélène focuses on participatory and deliberative innovations, and her new book, which is going to be published in February 2026, called Politics Without Politicians. Amazing. The cover is not going to be this exactly, but
it's going to be a full glass of water on the cover for the UK edition. So it's the idea that it's an optimistic take on politics, that we can have it all.
Great. And Lex Paulson, the director of the School of Collective Intelligence at the University Mohammed VI Polytechnique in Morocco, with extensive experience in training strategies for the presidential campaigns of Barack Obama, but also the French President Emmanuel Macron. I'm Elina Makri. I'm the general manager of the Democracy and Culture Foundation, which, among other projects to strengthen democracy, organizes the last 13 years with the New York Times in Athens, the Athens Democracy Forum. And the 2025 edition is going to take place next week in Athens from September 30th to October 3. I will start and I will be the devil's advocate, since we are in the city of mysteries and rituals. I feel there is so much preaching in the world right now. Oh my God, this country voted for this political leader, extreme things are happening, people don't know what they are thinking and what they are voting. And this is exactly the moment where I go back to the sciences and literature and even psychological literature to understand human nature and free will. And in order to set the atmosphere, I would like to read you a small part from Fyodor Dostoevsky's book, Notes from the Underground. And how do these wiseacres know that man wants a normal, virtuous choice? What has made them conceive that man must want a rationally advantageous choice? What man wants is simply independent choice. Whatever that independence may cost, and wherever it may lead. And choice, of course, the devil only knows what choice. Put it to the test and cast your eyes upon the history of mankind. In short, one may say anything about the history of the world, anything that might enter the most disordered imagination. The only thing one can't say is that it's rational. The very word sticks in one's throat, and indeed, this is the odd thing that is continually happening. There are continually turning up in life moral and rational persons, sages and lovers of humanity who make it their object to live all their lives as morally and rationally as possible to be, so to speak, a light to the neighbors, simply in order to show them that it is possible to live morally and rationally in this world. And yet, we all know that those very people sooner or later have been false to themselves, playing some queer trick, and often a most unseemly one. Now I ask you, what can be expected of man since he's being endowed with strange qualities? Shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species, and even then, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, men would play you some nasty trick. Then I go back to cognitive science that says, cognitive science says, you cannot treat people as irrational, because it's not a good starting point for science. Hélène, what can we learn from the sciences or the art about human nature, democracy, and free will?
So, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be here, this spiritual place, and very happy to be back in Greece. I was here this summer already. I just want to preface my answer by saying I am not an anthropologist, a cognitive scientist, an evolutionary psychologist, etc. And I don't think that we should necessarily look to answers to your political question in the natural sciences. In fact, they very much disagree about what human nature is, and it depends on what you mean by human, depends on what you mean by nature. It depends whether you look at Homo sapiens as a species, at individual beings, at the last 250 years. So for me, my answer would be, let's maybe not put too much burden on the sciences. Cognitive sciences can tell us about our tendencies to prejudice or generalization or things like that. But really, the answer is going to be cultural. I think what makes humans humans is essentially the culture they are born in. Even your choice of a Russian author, it's going to shape his view of humankind, let me tell you. It's a product, this quote itself is the product of a socio-political environment, a particular, rather grim history, and it shapes the expectations you have. And so my take is that I take a sort of non-biological, explicitly normative view of human nature. It is what we want it to be, what we would like it to become. And I would say that it's about collaboration, reason, and heart. And that's what I'm betting on to build a more, livable world.
I think in the case of the cognitive science, cognitive scientists are more optimistic on human nature than literature, than the passage I read. Lex?
It's not hard to be more optimistic than Dostoevsky, I have to admit. No, continue, sorry. Your question is vast, and I think what you have here in this dialectic between Hélène and I is actually kind of useful, because Hélène represents the finest expression of French thinking, in the sense that very careful, here are the subjects that I know, here are the subjects I don't know, and on the subjects that I know, here's the best that my interpretation of what can be said. Whereas Americans, we read 5 books here, we read 5 books there, and I'm a generalist and I can talk confidently about anything. So that's the difference you have between Hélène and I on this stage. So I'm lucky to work at the Université Mohammed VI Polytechnique with cognitive scientists and anthropologists in our School of Collective Intelligence. Collective intelligence, we study collaboration. And so politics has a lot, political science has a lot to say, cognitive science has a lot to say, anthropology has a lot to say, and also computer science. People who have created, for example, open source tools or platforms have a lot to say about collaboration. But I think reading the history of our species, especially, let's say, the last 300,000 years, since we were anatomically, we take someone from 1 million years ago, freeze them, unfreeze them, they're not going to be able to speak our language. But if you take someone from 200,000 years ago, freeze them, unfreeze them, they'd be able to sit with this microphone and learn our language and use apps on their phone, etc. So, in this time, what has distinguished our species? We're not the biggest, we're not the strongest, we're not the fastest. Human beings are, of all living creatures, capable of the most sophisticated collaboration. We're not the only collaborative species. Bees collaborate, whales collaborate, ants collaborate. But ants live like their grandparents. Ants do not reinvent themselves every generation. Ants do not create universities, map DNA, send rockets to the moon. Only human beings have been able to do those extraordinary things because we collaborate in a cumulative way. We profit from, in every sense, the accumulated wisdom of past generations, and we innovate in each generation, which an ant and a bee cannot do. That creates incredible opportunities as a human species to collaborate in the way the World Human Forum is a wonderful example of this collaboration. Athenian democracy was another example of an innovative form of collaboration. But it also can lead to despoiling the planet, right? Becoming the dominant species and then taking over the planet. So something in our nature is both deeply collaborative, but also competitive. So what Dostoevsky says about our desire for independence is incomplete. Human beings have this desire for independence that competes with a desire for belonging. And any society that really succeeds, like the Athenians did for that 200 years of their democracy, knows how to combine and mix and reconcile the spirit of collaboration with the spirit of competition. So that you had people coming to Eleusis and coming to the City Dionysia festival, competing to make the best tragedy, the best comedy, the best procession, but it was for a public good. So that spirit of competition and individualism was channeled towards the common good of the community. And that balance between individualism and collaboration is now completely thrown off balance because of the American mentality of capitalism, of individuals had to take care of themselves. We had the benefit and the curse of being thrust into this vast continent full of natural richness, and it's led to this extreme individualism, which unfortunately now dominates the way of thinking across the planet, and that's what we're up against.
So, since you're talking, Lex, about collaboration, let's go to the systems. You have both examined lots of systems in the world where democracy, as we said, thrives. Which ones from those that you have seen are the best out there, but sustainable as well?
So I think we have been living a lie when we're told that we live in democracies, that Greece is a democracy, that France is a democracy, that Brazil is a democracy, that America is. We have never lived in democracies. We live in republics. And if we ignore the difference between a republic, which is based on the Roman model of elections, of ruling factions, but every ruling member of the ruling class basically stays where they are, and a democracy where citizens actively participate, where power rotates, and where sortition, not election, is the main central way of delegating power. We were not really taught that in school. We were taught that republic, democracy, basically the same thing. Whereas my argument, inspired to a great deal by my friend Hélène, is that we have been living a very weak form of self-government. So all of the existing systems today that call themselves democracies are in fact weak forms of self-government, which delegates almost all power to govern to a very small elite. An Athenian would come and say, that's not a democracy, that's an oligarchy. If rich people always get their way, if the people in power always stay in power, that is not a democracy. And I think we've really misunderstood that fact. So the systems that I think are the most exciting are the ones that are experimenting with more democratic forms of decision-making. And so Hélène's written about the case of the Icelandic constitutional reform after the financial crisis, the Irish Constitutional Convention in 2011-2012, the French Convention pour le climat, which Hélène was an observer. These are examples of governments that are elected, that function the way that all democracies today function, through political parties and elections, but that are starting to use these ancient Athenian principles to deal with hard problems that politicians aren't solving. So everything you've heard me say, of course, Hélène will say much better because those are her ideas.
Can I go back to human nature for a second?
Of course.
Yeah, because actually it's interesting. We didn't coordinate on any of this, but you also said collaboration, but you said it's a natural property of human beings, and I said, well, it's a cultural one. And I don't have the answer. Again, I really, Hariri would say it's a sort of like the thing that made us triumph over the Neanderthal because we were able to, we were less strong individually, but we were capable of coordinating and become stronger as a collective against them. But I don't know, raising two children, I don't see the natural collaboration. I think it's very much taught, and you have to fight every day to make them see the value of it. So, it's possible we have the hooks and the genes and the predisposition, but they need to be activated. And you see, for example, Hobbes had a completely different view of human nature. I thought we were selfish and completely individualistic, and that it's only through the active use of our reason that we came to realize we'd be stronger together, if we want to protect ourselves from violence and live a short, brutish, nasty life, right? So I don't know. I think it's an open question. How much of culture, how much of nature?
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, nature and culture are a little bit of a false binary, a false dichotomy, because culture is created by human beings who have evolved in a certain way and are making choices based on our basic needs for survival. And so I think it's really only European thinkers, especially French, especially British thinkers, that created this opposition between reason and emotion, this opposition between the mind and the body, this opposition between nature and culture. And, Hélène and I kind of inherit that because we were in Western universities and read Western texts. But I was just in China, for example, 2 weeks ago, and once you leave the West and the Western kind of definitions and way, you start seeing that these concepts like nature and culture are understood differently and sometimes in a more fluid and complementary way. And I agree with you, though, that I think that we underestimate the degree in which culture frames our choices. And for example, in Russia, I have Russian friends who have said, well, why is it that Russian democracy failed, right, in the 1990s? And I've listened to friends give their attitude, and one of the things they say is, well, we had hundreds and hundreds of years since the Mongol invasions of Genghis Khan, we were trained to obey, and if you don't obey, you die, right? Imagine what hundreds and hundreds of years of that obedient mindset does to the basic expectations and attitudes and habits of mind of an entire society. So that when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917 thinking, oh, we're going to reinvent everything, and in fact what they did was actually preserve all of the czarist powers, all the czarist iconography, all the czarist ideas of authoritarian rule, but just under new management under Lenin and Stalin. And that shows you, that's a great example of how deeply rooted culture is and how hard it is to change like that. You have to invest in education, you have to invest in the arts, you have to invest and make long-term investments in the kinds of institutions that can create that cultural change.
So I would say the thing that we probably agree on is that, there's this quote from the movie who won the Palme d'Or recently at Cannes. It ends with this beautiful quote, there are no bad seeds, only bad gardeners. I think that, for me, that's where we should start. Like, if we have to build institutions, educational systems that take whatever it is people are born with and make the best out of it and grow them to be flourishing, beings. And but then to answer finally your question, I think that, so Lex said it, in fact, better than I could. And I want to thank you, in fact, for the contribution you made to my own book that you just introduced. You were a great source of wisdom, especially on the ancient world. But my ideal combination would be a mix of the direct democracy of Switzerland, the sort of crowdsourcing, tech-powered consultation methods of Taiwan, and of course the lot-based, deliberative juries that you find first and foremost in classical Athens. If we could get to a model like that, I could even live without the election part, I think.
Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just want to build off what Hélène said, because I think it's really interesting, the image of the cube. And just watching that video again, it helped crystallize something that I've been working on for my next book, which will be about how solving our political problems today will require us to reconnect with the Athenian story and the deep history of democracy. Is that we forget that technology also played a role in creating democracy in the ancient world. Two technologies in particular. Before about 700 BC, the law in Greece was whatever the lord said it was, whatever the local aristocrat, Kyrios, Basileus, said that the law was, whatever I say. And then what happens? The Greeks are, starting to sail again around the Mediterranean, the end of the Dark Ages, and they're trading with the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians have this funny way of keeping their accounts, right? And they say, what is that? Well, we call it an alphabet. Oh, really? Tell me about it. How does an alphabet work? Well, one letter means this, and you can combine them in different ways. And they taught them one by one and how to, do their accounts. And wow, this is actually really efficient and really going to be helping us do our trading. But of course, there were sounds in the Phoenician, the Middle Eastern alphabet that didn't have any equivalent in Greece, and there were sounds in the Greek alphabet, in the Greek language, that didn't have an equivalent. And so they took the ayn sound. There's no ayn, which is an Arabic Semitic sound in Greek. There's an ah. And so they said, we're going to take that upside down cow's head and make it an alpha. And the Greeks invented the vowel. And what did that do? It meant that anybody could learn how to read. Instead of being an Egyptian priest who had to train for 20 years, 30 years to learn how to read, now you could learn how to read in 1 or 2 years, basic stuff. And that meant that laws could be written that everyone could read. And once you had written laws, you had the possibility of a real political community based on citizens acting equally. So that technological change changed everything, right, in our politics. So just as Hélène talks about the ways in which governments like Taiwan have used internet platforms, not Facebook, not Silicon Valley designed tools that are designed to stimulate and divide us, but tools that were created by communities of coders and software developers in partnership with governments, can deal with these problems of scale, that we can't all meet each other in a country of 40 million people or of 400 million people. But we can combine together and form diverse crowds, diverse groups, people who think differently, all on the same problem, and that is how the Athenians also solved the problem of scale. Who here has ever seen a clariterion? The clariterion? It's the lottery machine. It was an ancient Athenian digital technology that they used to choose their juries and choose their councils. Kleros means the tirage au sort, the lottery. So clariterion was a machine where everyone who was potentially, could serve that year in the council, in the boule or on a jury, would get a little stick of wood, and the machine had all these slots of wood and a little kind of cup at the top with black and white balls. And if the black ball came down, you took the wood out, and if the white ball came down, you kept it in, and that was how they did a random selection. It was a randomizing machine. So Athenian technologies also permitted democratic decision-making and democratic life. And so we can use our technologies today not as the enemy, but as an enabler of participation and humanization, but only if we get the billionaires and the oligarchs out of the politics and recenter them on the communities of people who make them.
So both of you made reference to the sortition, which seems to be the cornerstone of the real democracy. And I wonder, how come the jury in the criminal system has survived in Greece, in the United States, and in several other parts of the world, and still citizens are asked to appear in court and decide who is a criminal. And we're talking about the most serious crimes, but in the political system, this mechanism has disappeared. Why do you think this is the case? And how we can revive it?
Helene's written a lot about
We need to
this.
understand where is the source, where is coming from.
Actually, I don't think we know. I think there's this big mystery that the first one, in the modern era who mentioned it is Bernard Manin in the Principles of Representative Government. He said, how come we call ourselves Democrats today when in fact we are not using sortitions or random selection the way the ancient Greeks did? And he wonder, why did we reinvent democracy in the 18th century on the basis of election, which have an oligarchic tendency to select only the rich and notables among the population rather than the middle class or let alone the poor. And he wondered, why did the Federalists not think of it? Why did the Anti-Federalists especially not think of it? What happened? And there's no clear explanation. There are various hypotheses. One is that, statistics wasn't invented yet, so understanding the properties of lots, you need probability theory, which was emerging in the 17th century, and statistics became really understood in the 19th century only, so there's a sort of technological, epistemological component. Even the concept of a sample, a statistical sample, not available until much later. So that disappeared. Another reason is that maybe we became enamored with this theory of political legitimacy that traces legitimacy to individual consent, so that an official is not really legitimate unless it's been voted in and consented to by individuals, even if it's only a majority. And then it becomes difficult then to select people by lot, because where is consent in all of this, right? It sort of vanishes. So the legitimacy of lot, we cannot attach it to consent. It has to come from something else, from political equality, the fact that each of us has an equal chance of accessing power, and you have to combine it with rotation so that this access is distributed over time across the entire citizenry. That's one reason. But then to your question about juries, where did they survive? Possibly because they come from a different tradition. They're not really, I don't think the criminal jury comes from Greece. I think it comes from what I read, a Norman tradition that then moved to England, and from England migrated to the US. And because it stayed confined to the legal sphere, it didn't really threaten political elites, right? Because they
were temporary. Domain, they just called it for a couple of weeks.
And the domain was really about, of decision was really about, okay, guilty, not guilty, you sentence one person to death, one person to 5 years in jail, one person to a fine or something. It doesn't really affect the distribution of goods in the larger population. It's not threatening landed interests. It's not threatening, confiscatory taxes on the rich, etc. So it was fine to let the people have their peer jury. It seems to make them very happy. In fact, there's a correlation. I mean, in countries where they have a jury system, there's more trust in the system. It's more efficient in terms of speed with which decisions are rendered, and it's quite accurate as far as we can tell from a comparison with DNA samples who help us identify who's truly guilty after the fact. So I don't know. These are my conjectures.
The Irish Assembly, I think it's just for some periods that some citizens are chosen. I think so. So it's not a permanent institution?
The institution, well, in Ireland, it's true that they were convened for a specific time. But in Athens, the council was permanent. Councillors, individuals, rotated through. But the institution was permanent. And now Paris, the city of Paris, has created a permanent citizens' assembly where the citizens rotate, but the assembly stays. The German-speaking part of Belgium. So there are a few permanent, but as Hélène says, it changes the power structure of the society. It gives less power to politicians, and so politicians won't accept it. And I think a big problem with those of us who believe in democracy and have studied deliberative and participatory democracy is that academics sort of rely on the goodwill of politicians to do stuff. Oh, this mayor wanted to try this participatory budget or this citizen assembly. So, oh, thank goodness. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're here to do our report and we're going to publish our book. Right, and most academics who promote these ideas of democracy don't really have a good theory of power and how to change the balance of power, because that's not their specialty. And so what we need is, for activists, people who are specialists in collective action and social movements, the ones who, for example, created Occupy Wall Street or Extinction Rebellion or Nuit Debout in France, who these are not all perfect geniuses, but there are some really innovative people at the tactical level thinking about how to put pressure on politicians. Those are the ones who need to be working with the small minority of progressive politicians who believe in real democracy, and the larger number of people from the academic world, like Hélène and myself, who develop the ideas, give the blueprint, can help with kind of the architecture of the system, but can't be the same ones to push politicians to make it happen, right? Just because most academics, it's not in their comfort zone, right? But to your point about the jury, because this is really, really interesting. And if you look before the French Revolution, say before 1789, democracy was a bad word everywhere. Like, I drove here today from the south of Attica, and I went past a sign on the highway that said Lamia. And I was like, oh, Lamia. That's the Lamian War. That's 322 BC. That's the end of Athenian democracy. That's the very, very end of the classical period after the death of Alexander and the creation of the Hellenistic monarchs. And so I'm like passing this place that has this resonance in history. From that year, all the way through Roman history, all the way through the Middle Ages, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, all the way through the Middle Ages in Europe, the Renaissance, until the Bastille. Democracy was a bad word. To call someone democratic meant that they loved the mob, they loved chaos, right? But then, not even 50 years later, Alexis de Tocqueville goes to America, writes Democracy in America. Democracy has become a good word. Now, how did that happen? That's a very interesting change. The democracy became a word of abuse. The democracy became, this is the wave of the future and we have to understand democracy. And I think there are all these little accidents of history, right? Had Louis XVI and George III not been terrible kings, not been really, really bad at their job, then the British and American and the American and French revolutions maybe could have happened in 1848 instead of 1789. And then statistics could have advanced to the point where we could have talked about random sampling and representative sampling, and we might have had a sortition-based modern democracy instead of one based on elections and political parties. 1820s, 1830s. Who here has heard of Andrew Jackson? You guys have Andrew Jackson? He's the face on the $20 bill. Bad guy, right? Yeah, we don't like, he killed a lot of Native Americans. He was generally, but he was a populist, right? In the way that Trump is a populist. Andrew Jackson knew that he could capitalize on this wave of more poor people voting, men, of course, white men. And so his main strategist was from the North, was named Martin Van Buren. And Martin Van Buren said, okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna double down on this election system. Instead of trying to create new forms of citizen power, we're going to double down on the election system because we have the numbers. So he organized the first political party, the first modern political party, which until very recently I was an active member, called the Democratic Party in America. As he shows you, the word democracy just at that moment became an okay word to say to other people. And so because of Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, the democratization of society became about voting, more people voting. Give black people the right to vote, give women the right to vote, give 18-year-olds the right to vote, 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 instead of about citizen power and sortition and serving directly in office. And that's where it all went wrong, ladies and gentlemen. That's where it all went wrong.
Yes, I just wanted to add to your thorough history that it also became a popular word when it became domesticated as the equivalent of representative government as opposed to something more radical like direct democracy, which was kind of the meaning before. And it's this domestication of the word that I think we're both resisting. We would like to return to the more original radical meaning, not necessarily direct democracy so much as, ruled by the people and not just a small elite speaking on their behalf with their consent. These are very different ideals. One is a sort of, oligarchic rule with popular consent. There's a tiny number of people rotating up there, sometimes not rotating very fast indeed. They stay in power 20, 30 years. They die on the job rather than let go.
Eight members of the US Congress died in office in the last 2 years. 8.
So in fact, you could call it not so much an oligarchy, a gerontocracy, meaning ruled by the old. I think it's a problem we're suffering from all over the West, It's ruled by the old, for the old, of the old. And who's being thrown under the bus? The youth. And that makes me very upset, actually. In France, students cannot pay for, dental services. They sleep in their cars on the parking lot of universities. And meanwhile, we have an enormous deficit, and nobody, because it's mostly old people voting, is going to vote to fix that. Because why should they? So I'm not, I'm trying not to encourage either class warfare or
a little
warfare.
class warfare is good, right?
But I think we need to face those realities that we've really not been true to the idea that every voice matters, and that we should be ruled by all of us, not just some of us.
I had other questions, but listening you now, it's changing the course of my questions too. Lex, you mentioned technology, and listening about technology. In recent years, we see so many applications, tools, e-participation, e-democracy, deliberation platforms. The European Commission gives so much money about technological tools that aim, to strengthen democracy and citizens' voice. But then I realized that, it's good to gather opinions, but I wonder, in a democracy, you want opinions or judgment? And I will give also one example from my state. In Greece, deliberation for some measures is important, public deliberation. And you see that rulers, let's say politicians, they say deliberation was open for some days. And I'm trying to say that this is not deliberation. When I don't have the time to think, when I don't have the knowledge to think about, when I don't have the opportunity to find common ground. So I think that technology becomes an excuse. And I even find this problem with the technological partners, that they don't understand what is deliberation. And I would like your thoughts on this, and on this also point, the difference between gathering opinions rather than gathering judgment, public judgment.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful thing that the World Human Forum chose this place for this conversation, because for hundreds and hundreds of years, people would come right here to be transformed. And the word mystery is not simply about that it was kept secret, although there were aspects of the ritual that you weren't supposed to know if you hadn't been initiated in through it. The mystery was also, what am I going to become? What's going to happen to me? Transformation involves risk and involves uncertainty. What am I going to be? How is this going to change me? And that's the secret that the Athenians can still teach us about deliberation. That if you go into a political process, like a citizens' assembly or a council, even a town council, totally sure that I know what I think about education, I know what I think about the environment, I know what I think about infrastructure, I know what I think about war and peace, and my job is to persuade everybody else to do what I want. That's the mentality of social media, right? It rewards people who are really sure of what they believe, and that what they believe is a really clear contrast to what everyone else believes. Is that a good way to govern a society? That's not how Athenians were taught how to think and work together. If you were a young Athenian, you grew up in your deme assembly, your neighborhood assembly, and then the age of 18, you're in a phoebe and you become initiated into the full assembly, the ecclesia, and then at 30, you can become a member of the boule, or the council. In each of these stages, you're transforming yourself. You're learning how to look at a moral problem from different ways. That was the point of tragedy and comedy, to help open your eyes that there were multiple ways of looking at a problem. You learned how to actually collaborate with people who were different from you. Richer people, poorer people, carpenters, fishermen, farmers, had to pool their resources and ideas and solve problems. Polls don't do that, right? Public opinion polls don't do that. Opinion polls require no effort. Just say whatever the first thing comes to your mind. It requires no bridge building. It requires no listening, right? And until citizens are given the opportunity to learn how to listen, to learn how to create consensus, to learn how to be humble. Yeah, I thought I saw the problem, but I only saw one part of it, and you helped me understand a different part of it. Those are habits of mind that we do not build in our societies, and that Athens knew how to build. What we can do better, of course, is expanding the idea of a citizen to include women, to include people who weren't born in our society. We can do better, thankfully, than the ancient world of 2,400 years ago. But we can also do better by rediscovering what we've forgotten, right? Which is that learning to be a citizen is being open to transforming yourself from the inside. And that's what the deliberative process that Hélène has written so eloquently about can do. You end up at the end of the process at the French Climate Convention a different person from when you started. And that is a beautiful thing to watch.
So deliberation for me is actually a technology. It's just one that we completely underinvest in compared to all these gadgets and tools and, very costly silicon-fueled, instruments. Deliberation is how we listen to each other respectfully, learn to appreciate somebody's different perspective, build together solutions. It's hard to do, it's hard to learn, and it demands practice. And I think it says something about the deficiencies of our existing governments, that they prefer pouring millions in tech companies rather than in the deliberative technologies we need to, take decisions together. And I wanted to connect that to the facet of the cube that has to do with education. Because I think one simple thing we should start with is teaching children to deliberate and maybe also to practice sortition by choosing their delegates or class delegates through sortition rather than election, start sharing power, rotating it among themselves, seeing that people who don't necessarily look promising as leaders can find those qualities in themselves once they're identified through lot. There are experiments in Bolivia done by Adam Cronkite, right? That show that. So I think it doesn't necessarily take a lot of money, but it takes some money. And being, at the intersection of both democratic theory and ethics of AI now, I see the discrepancy in funding that you have in one field versus the other, and that's what makes me a little skeptical that these attempts to consult people are sincere. And in fact, it's truly just consultation. When there's always this extremely paternalistic approach to deliberation often from politicians, in my experience, sadly, which is they always replace the vocabulary of deliberation, even when they use that term really, with consultation, teaching, but teaching them, pedagogy. They never pause and think, what can we learn? Should we just listen and not just filter and choose and pick and choose what in the consultation is convenient to our agenda, but truly take on board the agenda that emerges organically from deliberations. And I'm not opposed to purely aggregative moments of polling. Fine, that's a tool too. That's what the Taiwan procedures focus on, emerging things that are not necessarily deliberated over very thoroughly, but just combining these technologies. One is deliberation, one is aggregation of judgments. It's fine. It's just that those things need to have an actual impact and be funded, and they're not very much.
Time for collective intelligence. It's the time to open the discussion to the audience and accept some questions. I see one hand there, raised here. So do we have a mic? Okay, yeah, okay.
Hello? Yeah, thank you. So first of all, as co-founder and vice president of the World Human Forum, I want to thank you for this vivid discussion that we are sharing with you. And what comes to my mind, and I want to have a very specific question, if you see democracy as a software, as an operating system, as resonating to what you said, we should see it much more as an open source that we collectively develop together instead of purchasing a software which exists. If this is the case, I wonder why we're still discussing all these things in such a bubble. Do you know, for example, the book by Benjamin Barber, If Mayors Rule the World? Your book will be published next year, Hélène. I hope it will have a wide range also. I mean, the vision that mayors on small scales, sometimes not being members of political parties, are more close to the citizens. And if they collect and create a global parliament of mayors, that was the idea of Ben Barber, it didn't happen in the end, really, on a big scale. But I wonder, really, we are still discussing this in our small bubbles. How we can make sure, and this is my question to the three of you, actually, and it will be a topic, I guess, also at the Athens Democracy Forum next week, how we can really make an upscale, how can we make it wide range available, how we can use artificial intelligence supporting these new forms of democracy. Maybe we need to find partnerships, and why not working with Google? I mean, everybody using it. The sense-making tool called the Cube of the World Human Forum, for some coincidence, reminds you maybe almost as Google would have made it. It's the same colors, it's the same principles. I wonder if you think about how we can proceed quicker, faster to enlarge this participatory democracy you're dreaming about, instead of keep talking about it as something that should happen in the future. Yesterday we had the presentation of Victoria of the Wonder House in Nairobi. How can the world become a wonder house in terms of collective development of democracy? How can we proceed beyond the bubble of gatherings like happening here? The mysteries were really only for a couple of people, like 3,000 people took part each time. What we are looking for is creating something like a worldwide social democratic movement. And my question is really, how can we accelerate, how we can scale up, how we can really make it happen? Do you have ideas for that? That's my question.
Because we don't have a lot of time, I suggest we take one more question and then you answer them all. Yes? Yes.
Thank you all.
And then we'll hang out afterwards if there are other questions that people want to ask us.
Thank you all. Going back to what Jochen said, and my initial observation and question that follows on that, is, you know, listening to you, I'm an anthropologist and musician. Anyway, I came across a hermeneutics of dualism, of dualities, turned into dualisms: nature versus culture, democracy versus republic. These are interpretations. Interpretations are cultural acts. The issue is, obviously, something is missing out there in the world. Politics that turn from up down or looking from the roots up, these are only inversions of the same reality. Something is missing. And to go to the big picture that Jochen drew for us, you know, mathematicians bring close together the infinitesimal, the very small, with the infinite. They are both the same. They are talking about the same reality. So to go to the big picture, we have to go to the minute reality. So in my view, what is missing is self-awareness. If we educate people in the ways that culture has given us, the global society, they will only reverse the case, thus benefiting the ruling elites, because they will be faster in taking over this idea. And just to close my observation, at the heyday of democracy in Athens, you mentioned that many times, there was a philosopher we all know, Plato. Plato did not give us a democracy. He gave us the republic. Now, the republic within the heyday of democracy meant something. His work was misconstrued, his work was a great source of inspiration for many, but he meant really deep things concerning humanity.
I hate to correct you on this point, but his book was not called The Republic. That was the Latin translation of his book called the Politeia. Just a small point, but important one.
Still, the Politeia is not democratia.
No, definitely not.
So still, my point remains. So we need to bring politics out of culture in relation to culture. And this, in my view, is the spiritual question. How can people learn what humanity is directly, not through indirect ways managed by others? Thank you.
So we have the first question of the acceleration and the second position. Yes, you can start, Hélène.
So Barbara was both right and wrong, I would say. I don't think a global parliament of mayors would be great. I think it would be 90% male, notables, not a good idea. I would much prefer a randomly selected one if we're going that route. But what I was right is that we should start with the local, with communities. I don't see how you can make that happen otherwise. Doesn't mean we can start at the global as well. I think right now there are activists trying to do both, and hopefully they will connect. So you had an attempt that I've been part of to create a global deliberative process on AI regulation. It's not taken off, unfortunately, because I don't think the political will is there, the funding's not there, but we have to keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And then the question of the micro and the macro, and I think goes back to the Socratic insight, know thyself. Like you have to first look at yourself. And I would say, let's all look at ourselves inwardly. What is our relationship to power in the most minute things we do? You know, at home, how do we treat our children? At work, how do we treat our employees? How do we model sharing of power rather than hogging of power? When we ask a question in a public environment, do we ask a short question to leave, you know, plenty of time for other people, or do we hog the microphone? I mean, these are all questions we have to ask ourselves. Thank you.
Anything to add?
We're trying to change political systems to make a democratic world. The time is running out. Right? The natural form of human government at large scale is authoritarian, going back to Mesopotamia, the pyramids, all the way to Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Mohammed bin Salman. The natural form of big, large-scale government is authoritarian. The idea that human beings can govern themselves is pretty exceptional and fragile. I like the word fragile on this fragile earth, this fragile planet we have. But it's powerful when it's well organized, when it's well resourced, as Hélène said. Diverse groups of citizens can actually outthink and outmaneuver and outperform authoritarians in the way that this small city-state of Athens, working with their neighbors, the Plataeans, were up against 100,000 soldiers from the Persian army. Right? And Darius comes in, and on the plains of Marathon, they surprise the world. So yes, democracies can defeat dictators. Right now, in Kathmandu, who is following what's happening in Sri Lanka right now? Not Sri Lanka, Nepal. That's what I meant to say, Nepal. So Nepal is having a revolution. They call it the Generation Z revolution. And because at some point, the corruption of the ruling class in Nepal was just so flagrant and so glaring, and social media had shown these examples of these, you know, Nepo babies living these crazy privileged lives. And as Hélène said, the young people are the ones who deserve to feel the most frustrated and outraged. And they protested at massive risk to themselves, and now the government has turned over, and they, using Discord, using a video game platform, have together the activists, the hundreds and thousands of activists, have decided on a new technocratic government. This woman is now just taken office as the new caretaker prime. This is where we should all be. If we want to create a democratic world, all of us should be on the next plane to Kathmandu. Right? Not because we know more than them, but because these are people who, I was in Egypt in 2011, anytime that you see these moments of transition, these are activists who accept and welcome resources and help and ideas. And so we can be brothers and sisters to our fellow activists at key moments, what the Greeks called the kairos, right? These key moments after a financial crisis in Iceland or in Ireland, after the Gilets jaunes crisis in France, after this crisis of corruption in Nepal. These are key moments where a coalition of people, insiders and outsiders, academics, tool builders, activists, can work together in coalitions and just inflect the point of history to where a society could be reorganized on democratic principles. It's possible. It's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's going to take us building bridges, as you said, Jochen, across our bubbles, across our comfortable networks of friends with people in Nepal and Nigeria and Taiwan and Brazil, right? That is how we combine our forces together to put pressure at the right place, at the right time, and a democratic change can then be possible.
Thank you. As we run out of time, we will keep you here.
You have one more question over there.
We can continue with questions. Okay.
All right, then I will be very, very quick. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. And I'm really glad also this afternoon we'll have this discussion on education, because I think it's at the very core. Because I'm French as well, and since I'm 5 years old, I've learned how to be in competition with others. I've learned authority, how to respect the adults, and it creates really individualistic people. And if you have 15 years of education where you turn like young into citizens that learn how to be individualistic, you cannot become a citizen that will be citizenship that will be based on mutual aid and partnership. So my question is that there was been experiences like in Spain in the early 20s with the modern school of Francisco Ferrer. My question would be, do you know if today there are some experiences of education that turns into citizens that are more based on partnerships rather than individualistic, like communities around the world are experiencing new systems of education, like to turn better citizens?
Another question? So we take some questions and... Yes.
This lady has her hand up over there for a while, so can you give her the microphone? No, this
Lots
lady
of questions. I'm very happy you find the discussion. Yes, we will take one more question and then we continue because we will be...
Can you pass the microphone up to that lady, please?
Let me just say that as for the question on education, you will get your answer immediately now.
It's
if
the
you
next
all
session.
Stay. It's the session. You will get a real answer on that.
So we can accept one more question before?
I mean, we are happy to hear from Hélène and just saying that you will get more on the next session.
All good? Go ahead, ask your question.
I just want to say welcome on this court, people. I identify as my ancestors who are Indonesian. I have an African husband. And yes, it is all happening with all the young people out there. We have decentralized autonomous organizations. We have discords. We have all these things are happening. It is the Pi network that is most important because it's not the activists, but it is the freelancers that do it at this moment. They trade together. And that's one question I have for you, because I got into this field in 2016 with Bernard Littard, a distinguished professor on the Sorbonne of macroeconomics. And he said how it could happen. Even without debt, people without debt. And at that moment, he still thought it would be with government. Later, he came to a different conclusion with the Bancor protocol. He died, so we didn't do the project together that we envisioned. But how do you see how the bridge is going to be with the governments? Because the governments only want to tax the cryptos. So it is all tokenization, it's all token-based, it's all decentralized autonomous organizations. If you want to know more about it, just read about it or whatever. But how do you see how the governments will react to this by putting VAT on all these small trades?
Brief, very brief answers.
You go ahead. I'll just be 1 minute. The problem with DAOs, they don't have armies. Politics is based, one of the pillars of a state, of a political community, is some subset of those people who carry the guns, who carry the swords. Sorry? That's looking at it the other way. Until those who really want to opt out of the nation state can come up with a solution to that problem, right, of how to create a police force and an army and borders. Unfortunately, we're in a Westphalian system, right? We're in a system where no matter where we are in the world, some government with an army and a police force claims sovereignty over where you're sitting. That's ominous music to back up what I'm saying. See what I mean? That's the government. So this is a major problem. I think that, and Hélène has worked with the French government repeatedly over the last 5 years about this, you have to find champions. Within every government, there is some small subset of people who are interested in doing politics differently, both because they believe in it, small subset, but also because it can maybe help them build their careers. right? Brad Lander was a councilman in New York City, goes down to Brazil, hears about participatory budgeting, comes and brings it up back to New York. New York created one of the biggest participatory budgets in the world to give citizens the real power, including non-citizens, just residents of New York City. And Brad Lander's career has gone up because of this, right? He's now one of the kind of the top guys around Zoran Mamdani, who could be the next mayor of New York City. So you have to find politicians who are both possible champions and who see the political upside for them. Macron was one of those people. I worked for Macron in 2017, 2018. He completely diluted, as Hélène said, diluted the results of this Citizens' Assembly. But I believed in him for a little while. You can't believe in politicians too much, right? You can't believe in them too much, but you need to find some champions on the inside, because guess what? Until we get rid of the nation-state system, someday, we have to work within it. We have to work to create change within the system that surrounds us.
Last word.
So since we're going to have all the answer on education, I'm going to skip that. But I just wanted to use that question to, and happy to talk one-on-one, but I just wanted to open that question to the economy, because you know what, we talk about democracy all day long, but really most people who work for companies basically live in spend 8 hours a day in a dictatorship. And I don't think it creates the mindset that you need to then be involved in politics, be thinking critically about politics, because you take for granted authority, and your decision-making power being taken away from you at all points in the economic sphere. So I think lots of work there as well.
I would like to warmly thank you both and all of you for attending the session. And I would like to ask to come to the stage the next moderator, Ms. Mitsotakis. Thank you.